Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We're going to be talking about an enigma and a mystery this knife carries with it right here. This is an Imperial Hecho in Mexico knife, which simply means this is an Imperial made in Mexico. And these are very scarce knives. There's not a lot of information on this knife about these knives coming out of Mexico, how they were produced, when they were produced, the story behind them. But we're going to shed light on all of that, and we're going to tear down that veil of secrecy and mystery on this knife. And if you'd like to hear more about the this knife and knives made by Imperial in Mexico, go ahead and check out the video.
If you know.
All right, welcome back to the fortified castle, where everything obscure is brought into the light and made apparent. And that's what we're going to do with the history of this little knife today, and the history of Imperial and its activities in Mexico. Not a lot of information out there. I have to tell you that this information I found, Jason Rosinski, Rosinsky. He wrote an article in Knife Magazine, and that's where all this information comes from. It's the only information I've ever seen on knives, Imperial knives made in Mexico. Going to be really interesting. So let me just say hi to all of my viewers, and welcome back to the channel. I really appreciate y'all. I appreciate your support. I also appreciate the support of other channels who, we're all part of a brotherhood, a family. And I really appreciate all those guys, the communication we have, the support. And let's talk about this knife. So this is a standard 3 5/8 inch utility knife. It's 5 blades, and so it has a main blade. It has a can opener, which this is a hawkbill can opener. But this patent number right here is the first really cool thing about this knife. So that is a U.S. patent for a hawkbill can opener applied for by Imperial, the Miranda brothers, and was approved in December 25th, Christmas Day, on 1945. Here's a cap lifter, and then you have a standard awl on this knife right here. Kind of hard to open. I think this knife was pretty old, probably built in the 50s, and really strong back springs on this knife. Okay, hold on. All right, I got it open. Man, that's a strong back string on that. And you see a nice little can opener there, or awl. It is sharp. Looks like, I don't know, has an unusual design. Maybe somebody ground that down to make it sharper, probably so. I don't know. You have a corkscrew right here. Kind of interesting if you look at this. One thing is it's not as substantial as a lot of corkscrews. And then if you look right here, you can see where it's most corkscrews you see have tang, and this does not. So they just wrap the corkscrew blade around the pin. You can see that right there. See it? It's kind of interesting. Doesn't look like a really robust build on that. And then the scales are Fosterine. We'll be talking about that. What the heck is that? It's a plastic, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. Had a shield on here, but has fallen off. over time. This is another surprising thing. This is a 3 back spring knife with 2 dividers in it. So interesting build on this knife overall. These were really inexpensive knives that were made in Mexico. And I guess the first question is, were they made to be imported to the United States? Okay, so there is no evidence, documentation, or records of any type of these being imported into the United States. It looks like these were simply meant for Mexican consumption. These knives are scarce because they were inexpensive and people used them that way. So they hard used them. When they broke, they threw them away, or they just got a new one. And so even in amongst the knife collectors down in Mexico, they're very scarce to find these, and it's really hard to find in America. You don't see them very often. So let's talk about the history of how this came to be. It's fascinating. Okay, so this story starts out with 3 principal people. Albert Baer, who was at the time an executive with Imperial Knife Company. Joseph Foster, who you may know with Foster Grant glasses. And so he was involved in those industries. And a guy named PG France, rather. So he was just a buyer for Woolworths. And so he was acquainted with Albert Baer because Woolworth, Imperial was making knives for Woolworth. And then he was acquainted with Joseph Foster because he was buying plastic goods from Foster Grant. And so he hooked those two up together. And his idea was that, maybe Imperial could use these plastic scales that Foster Grant was making this plastic called fostering. And so they met and they had established a long, probably lifetime relationship. So Joseph Foster had a plant down in Monterrey, Mexico, and he was producing mainly out of that plant. He was producing molded hair products like combs, clips, those types of things that was used in hygiene and in healthcare, those kind of things. Hair grooming. And so Foster approached Baer and said, hey, I don't even use all of this plant I have down in Monterey. Why don't you look at producing some knives down there? And so Baer did. And Foster Grant was producing products down there since 1931. And in 1941, Imperial moved ahead to establish a factory in down there in Monterrey, Mexico. By 1944, they had things going. They were producing knives, and by 1947, they were showing addresses down, Monterey addresses. So they had the business up and running by 1947 at least, and that's kind of surprising. But what they did is they used this fostering, which is what this plastic was called, and Joseph Foster developed this plastic, and they just used little beads and melted them to create the plastic. He sold that to DuPont, and not the patent, but he just sold his products to DuPont, and DuPont used them in plastics that they made, and so created a problem between DuPont and Foster and patents and regulations. And so he ended up having to do that down in Mexico, at least temporarily, because DuPont was giving him a hard time about selling this to other people, which he was doing. And so they start using this factory, making these knives out of this factory. And they never really made money. So they never made a profit on these knives. And basically, the crazy thing is, I guess it's not too crazy, but it was an excuse for executives to go down to Mexico, and so it really was a vacation spot for Imperial, and it really looks like that was it. So the only reason Albert Bear was involved in it was a good place to go to vacation, and they used to go down there and have a good time, the executives, and this factory was an excuse to go down there and call it a business expense. So by 1964, Imperial's had it pretty much with this, and they sell the assets down there to a company called Associated Spring, which is out of Bristol, Connecticut. Later, they became involved in a larger conglomerate. But Associated Spring mainly wanted the facilities as a jumping off point for marketing down into Central and South America. And by 1982, they had not turned a profit with this company either. And so they sold everything to a competitor locally called Cuchilleria Monterrey, which Cuchilleria is Imperial in Spanish. Cuchilleria Monterrey, who continued to make these knife patterns. And really interestingly, they were also involved in the Pastor almond knives, and so they own that trademark, the Pastor almond knives, and that's where those knives were made in Monterrey, Mexico. That's pretty interesting that all of that is connected, and that was done till late 80s before Cuchilleria Monterrey went out of business. Sometime in the late 80s or early 90s. It's not really clear. So really interesting history on these knives. These knives, this knife here is probably from the 1950s. They made 20 different models. I put that up on the screen for you. And after that, the Associated Spring continued just making the same knives. Cuchilleria Monterrey kind of expanded it. There's some other products that are marked with different markings than these tang stamps. And I put up for you the tang stamps on these, and those are the ones that Imperial used for these knives. And so anything different than that is either produced by Associated Springs or Cuchilleria Monterrey. And so I hope you found that as interesting as I did. Really fascinating history on these things. And it was just so cool to be able to get a hold of that information, because there was no other information on these knives other than Imperial made them in Mexico. So thanks again, guys. Thanks for your support, and I'll see you in the next video.